Caesar is back, and there will be yet another battle to put at rest the insurrection of the Gauls. Showdown before the winter begins. Subscribe and watch the video to discover more. Thanks. Learning of Crassus's arrival from his scouts around the 3rd hour, Caesar advanced 20 miles that day. He appointed Crassus to command Semirabreva with a legion, as he was leaving there all the army's baggage, hostages of the states, public documents, and all the grain he had brought there to endure the winter. Fabius, following orders, met Caesar on the march with his legion. Labienus, aware of Sabinus's death and the slaughter of the cohorts, and having received all the forces of the Treveri, feared he could not withstand the enemy's attack if he made a retreat from the winter quarters that looked like a flight, especially since he knew they were emboldened by their recent victory. He wrote back to Caesar, explaining the danger involved in leading his legion out of the winter quarters and describing the events among the Eburones. He reported that Caesar, approving of his plan, though disappointed that his forces were reduced from 3 legions to 2, placed all hope for their common safety in speed. He hurried into the territory of the Nervi. There, he learned from captives about the situation at Cicero's camp and the peril they were in. He persuaded a certain Gallic horseman with great rewards to deliver a letter to Cicero. He sent this letter written in Greek characters to prevent the enemy from understanding it if intercepted. If the messenger could not approach the camp, he was instructed to tie the letter to a javelin and throw it within the fortifications. The letter stated that Caesar was on his way with the legions and urged them to maintain their former courage. The Gallic messenger, fearing danger, threw the javelin as instructed. By chance, it stuck to a tower and went unnoticed by our men for 2 days, but was discovered on the 3rd day by a soldier who brought it to Cicero. After reading it, Cicero recited it in a meeting of the soldiers, filling everyone with the greatest joy. Then, smoke from distant fires was seen, dispelling all doubt about the arrival of the legions. Upon learning this, the Gauls abandoned the siege and hurried with all their forces towards Caesar. There were about 60,000 armed men. Given the opportunity, Cicero once again requested the Gallic messenger from Vertigo, who was mentioned earlier, to carry a letter to Caesar. He advised him to travel cautiously and carefully, writing in the letter that the enemy had left and directed all their forces towards Caesar. Receiving these letters around midnight, Caesar informed his men and bolstered their spirits for the fight. At first light, he moved his camp and, after advancing about 4 miles, spotted the enemy's multitude across a valley and a stream. It was very risky to engage in such a disadvantageous position with such small forces. So, knowing that Cicero had been freed from siege, he decided to slow his pace. He set up camp in the most advantageous position possible, despite the limited number of his men, about 7,000 with no baggage, contracting his camp to appear as small and weak as possible to the enemy. Meanwhile, he sent scouts in all directions to find the best way to cross the valley. That day, there were small cavalry skirmishes near the water, and both sides held their positions. The Gauls were waiting for reinforcements that had not yet arrived, and Caesar hoped to lure the enemy across the valley by feigning fear so they would engage in battle near his camp. If this failed, he wanted to find a safer way to cross the valley and stream. At first light, the enemy's cavalry approached the camp and engaged in a skirmish with our cavalry. Caesar ordered his cavalry to retreat deliberately and take shelter in the camp, instructing that the fortifications be heightened and the gates blocked, all with great commotion and the pretense of fear. Encouraged by these actions, the enemy brought their forces across and arranged their line in a disadvantageous position. They even approached the camp, threw weapons inside, and sent heralds around proclaiming that any Gaul or Roman who wished to switch sides before the 3rd hour could do so without risk. After that time, there would be no opportunity. They despised our men so much that they began to dismantle the rampart and fill the trenches. Then Caesar, opening all the gates and sending out the cavalry, quickly put the enemy to flight, killing a large number of them and stripping them of their weapons. Fearing to pursue them further due to the intervening woods and marshes, and not wanting to leave the position, Caesar reached Cicero the same day with all his forces safe. He marveled at the towers, mantlets, and fortifications the enemy had constructed. He found that not 1 in 10 of Cicero's men was unwounded, and from these facts, judged how great the danger and how admirable the courage had been. He praised Cicero and the legion for their service, commended each centurion and tribune by name for their exceptional bravery, as attested by Cicero. From captives, he learned more precisely about the fate of Sabinus and Cotta. The next day, he held an assembly, recounted the events, and consoled and encouraged his soldiers, explaining that the loss was due to the rashness of a legate and should be borne more calmly, because the harm had been mitigated by the immortal gods and their own valor, leaving the enemy no long-lasting joy or themselves prolonged sorrow. Meanwhile, news of Caesar's victory was carried to Labienus through the Remi with incredible speed. Though Caesar had reached Cicero's camp around the 11th hour and arrived about 60 miles away by the next day, before midnight, shouts of victory and congratulations arose from Labienus's camp. This news, reaching the Treveri, caused Indutiomarus to abandon his plan to attack Labienus's camp the next day and flee with all his forces back to the Treveri. Caesar sent Fabius with his legion back to winter quarters, and he himself decided to winter with 3 legions near Samarabriva, occupying 3 separate camps. Given the significant unrest in Gaul, he decided to stay with the army for the entire winter. For almost no time during the winter passed without some news of Gallic plans or movements, causing Caesar concern. He learned from Lucius Roscius, who commanded the 13th Legion, that large forces from the tribes known as the Armoricae had gathered to attack him and had approached within 8 miles of his winter quarters. However, upon hearing of Caesar's victory, they dispersed in such a hurry that it appeared more like a flight. Caesar, having summoned the chiefs of each tribe to him, managed to keep most of Gaul loyal through a combination of threats, declaring that he knew what was happening, and encouragement. Nevertheless, the Senones, a tribe particularly strong and influential among the Gauls, attempted to kill Cavarinus, whom Caesar had installed as king over them. His brother, Moritascus, had held the kingship upon Caesar's arrival in Gaul, as had their ancestors. When Cavarinus became aware of the plot, he fled. They pursued him to the borders, expelled him from his kingdom and home, and sent envoys to Caesar to explain their actions. However, when Caesar ordered the entire Senate to come to him, they disobeyed. This situation had such a profound effect on the barbarians and caused such a change in everyone's attitudes that, except for the Aedui and Remi, whom Caesar always held in high regard, one for their long-standing and constant loyalty to the Roman people, the other for their recent services in the Gallic War, nearly every tribe was viewed with suspicion. This is perhaps not surprising, given many other reasons, but especially because those who were considered the bravest warriors now had to endure the commands of the Roman people, which they found deeply humiliating. The Treveri and Indutiomarus did not waste any time during the entire winter, constantly sending envoys across the Rhine, stirring up the tribes, promising money, and declaring that a large part of the Roman army had been killed, leaving only a much smaller portion remaining. Nevertheless, no German tribe could be persuaded to cross the Rhine, as they claimed they had already tested their fortune twice, once in the War of Ariovistus and once in the crossing of the Tencteri, and they were not willing to risk it again. Losing this hope, Indutiomarus nevertheless began to gather and train forces, procure horses from nearby tribes, and attract exiles and outlaws from all over Gaul with great rewards. He gained so much authority in Gaul that delegations came to him from all directions, seeking his favor and friendship, both publicly and privately. When he realized that people were coming to him willingly, and that the Senones and Carnutes were being incited by guilt on one side, and the Nervii and Aduatuci were preparing for war against the Romans on the other, he called an armed council. This is the beginning of a war by Gallic custom, where all able-bodied men gather by common law. The last to arrive is killed in front of the gathered multitude after enduring all kinds of tortures. In this council, he declared his son-in-law, Cingetorix, an enemy, and confiscated his property because he had remained loyal to Caesar. After completing these tasks, he announced in the council that he had been invited by the Senones, Carnutes, and several other Gallic tribes to march through the lands of the Remi, plunder their fields, and before doing so, attack Labienus's camp. He instructed them on what he wanted to be done. Labienus, holding a well-fortified camp, both by nature and by hand, feared nothing for his safety or that of his legion, but was considering how he might seize any opportunity for a successful action. Learning from Cingetorix and his relatives about Indutiomarus' speech in the council, he sent messengers to nearby tribes and summoned cavalry from all directions, setting a specific day for them to assemble. Meanwhile, Indutiomarus, with increasing contempt, approached the camp almost daily with all his cavalry, sometimes to observe the camp's layout, sometimes for talks or to intimidate. His cavalry often threw weapons inside the rampart. Labienus kept his men inside the fortifications and increased the appearance of fear as much as possible. As Indutiomarus approached the camp with increasing disdain, Labienus, having brought in cavalry from all the nearby tribes with great diligence, ensured none of his plans were revealed or reported to the Treveri. Meanwhile, Indutiomarus, following his daily routine, approached the camp and spent a large part of the day there. His cavalry threw weapons and taunted our men to fight. When our men gave no response, and it seemed fitting, they dispersed and left towards evening. Suddenly, Labienus sent out all his cavalry through 2 gates. He ordered and commanded them to pursue the enemy and put them to flight, and, as he expected, this happened. They all targeted Indutiomarus, forbidding anyone from wounding another before Indutiomarus was killed, as he did not want him to escape while others were being attacked. He offered great rewards to those who killed him and sent cohorts to support the cavalry. Labienus' plan was successful. Indutiomarus was caught and killed while crossing a river, and his head was brought back to the camp. The returning cavalry pursued and killed as many of the enemy as they could. Upon learning of this, all the assembled forces of the Eburones and Nervi dispersed, and Caesar found Gaul much quieter after this event. This was a kind of happy end for Caesar. The next Liber 6 is waiting to be read, listened, and seen. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more content. Thanks, and see you soon, Legionary.